Hi, I'm Amy, just your average college student, but I've got a story to tell, one that still keeps me up at night sometimes. To really understand how everything went wrong, though, I need to take you back to where it all began. I was 14 when we lost Dad. My sister was only 9. It happened so fast. One minute he was heading home from work, the next we were getting a call about a car accident. Some drunk driver had run a red light and slammed right into him. He hung on for 3 days in the hospital, but his injuries were just too severe. After Dad died, Mom was completely devastated. I remember her sitting in Dad's parents' living room, tears streaming down her face as she told them, "I'll never marry again. There will never be another man like John." My grandparents, Dad's parents, were amazing through it all. They let us stay in their house and made sure we had everything we needed. Mom didn't even have to work, they sent her money every month to take care of us. But that's when things started changing with Mom. It was subtle at first, but as time went on, it became impossible to ignore how differently she treated me and my sister. Like when we'd go back to school shopping, my sister would get 5 new outfits, while I'd get told to make do with last year's clothes. Or at dinner, she'd always give my sister the bigger piece of chicken or the last cookie. Christmas was the worst. My sister would get a pile of presents, while I'd get maybe 1 or 2 things. "Mom, can I join the school band?" I asked once, excited about learning to play the flute. "Oh, honey, we just can't afford instrument rental right now," she said. But the very next week, when my sister mentioned wanting to take dance classes, Mom signed her up immediately. "Of course, sweetie, we need to nurture your talents." Even with simple things, like when we'd both ask for help with homework, Mom would drop everything to help my sister while telling me to figure it out on my own. Or when we'd both achieve something at school, my sister would get taken out for ice cream for getting a B, while my straight A's barely got a good job. The weird thing was, I learned to live with it. Maybe because my sister was so different from Mom. She'd always try to share her new things with me or stick up for me when she could. That's what made it bearable, I guess, knowing that even if Mom played favorites, my sister never did. We stayed close despite everything. I loved watching her practice her dance routines, and she'd sit and listen to me play the cheap plastic recorder I bought with my allowance money since I couldn't join band. We were a team, me and her, no matter what Mom did or said. I was 16 when my sister turned 11, and that's when everything changed again. What started as routine blood work during a regular checkup turned into our worst nightmare. Sarah was diagnosed with kidney failure. I still remember sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room while the doctor explained everything to Mom. The words felt like they were coming from underwater: chronic kidney disease, treatment options, long-term care plans. Sarah, my vibrant little sister who loved to dance and could make anyone smile, was suddenly a patient. The diagnosis brought us even closer together. While Mom spent hours researching treatments and talking to doctors, I'd sit with Sarah during her appointments, playing card games and making up silly stories to distract her. We'd laugh together about the awful hospital food and make plans for all the things we'd do once she felt better. Mom barely noticed I was there. She'd spend hours discussing Sarah's treatment with the doctors, completely forgetting I was in the room. When she did acknowledge me, it was usually just to send me to get something for Sarah or to tell me to be quieter. But I understood, Sarah was sick, she needed the attention more than I did. Before I knew it, I was 18 and graduating high school. My grades were good enough to get me a partial scholarship to a college in another state. Grandma and Grandpa stepped in again, offering to cover the rest of my tuition and expenses. Mom barely made it to the ceremony. She was late because Sarah had a doctor's appointment that morning. She didn't even stay for pictures, rushing off to get Sarah to another appointment. But again, I couldn't blame her. Sarah's health had to come first. College was like stepping into another world. Suddenly, I was hundreds of miles away from the family drama, making new friends, taking interesting classes, and finally feeling like I could breathe. I called Sarah and my grandparents regularly, sharing stories about my classes and campus life. Sarah would tell me about her treatments and how she was feeling, while Grandma and Grandpa kept me updated on everything happening at home. Mom rarely called. When she did, it was usually to tell me about Sarah's latest test results or to remind me to call my sister more often. She never asked about my classes or how I was doing. But that was okay, I was used to it by now. I was in the middle of my junior year when everything fell apart. It was just after midnight when my phone rang, Mom's number lighting up the screen. My stomach dropped, she never called this late. Amy? Her voice was raw, hysterical. Sarah's in the hospital. Her kidneys, they've completely failed. She's on a hemodialysis machine. I could hear her crying through the phone. You need to come home right now. The next morning was a blur of emails to professors and rushed packing. I managed to get a leave of absence approved and booked a train ticket home. As the landscape rushed past my window, all I could think about was Sarah, lying in a hospital bed, waiting for me to come home. Mom was waiting for me at the train station, pacing back and forth on the platform. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. As soon as she saw me, she grabbed my arm and started pulling me toward the parking lot. The entire car ride home was filled with Mom's endless stream of words about Sarah's condition. How pale she looked during the procedures. How much weight she'd lost. How she could barely eat because the medications made her nauseated. How the needles left bruises on her arms. Each detail felt like a knife twisting in my gut. She's so weak, Amy, Mom kept saying, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. My baby is suffering so much. The hemodialysis is keeping her alive, but it's not a solution. She needs a real kidney, she needs. Mom suddenly fell silent as we pulled into our driveway. She turned off the engine, but didn't get out of the car. Instead, she turned to face me, and I saw something change in her expression. The worried, tearful look was replaced by something harder, colder. You can save her, she said, her voice suddenly stern and commanding, you must give her your kidney. I sat there, frozen. It wasn't the suggestion that shocked me, of course I'd considered the possibility of being a donor. It was the way she said it, like she was ordering me to hand over an object that belonged to her. Mom, I said carefully, what about the risks? What would happen to my health if I... She cut me off with a harsh laugh. Your health? Sarah's life and health are more important than yours. How can you even think about yourself at a time like this? The cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I stumbled out of the car and ran into the house, tears already streaming down my face. Behind me, I could hear Mom shouting. I locked myself in my old bedroom and collapsed onto the bed. I cried all night, muffling my sobs in my pillow so Mom wouldn't hear them and start yelling again. My mind kept spinning with questions. Did I even have a choice? What would happen to Sarah if I said no? What would happen to me if I said yes? Would Mom ever forgive me if I refused? When I finally came down for breakfast the next morning, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, calmly drinking her coffee like nothing had happened. She looked up when I walked in, and in a matter-of-fact tone, said, "We need to get you tested as soon as possible to make sure you're a suitable donor. I'll call the hospital today to schedule the appointments." I gripped my coffee mug tightly, trying to keep my voice steady. Mom, I haven't decided yet about giving Sarah my kidney. The silence lasted only a moment before Mom exploded. She slammed her coffee mug down so hard that hot coffee splashed across the table. You haven't decided? She screamed, her face turning red. What is there to decide? Your sister is dying. I flinched as she stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. Mom, please. Don't you mom me, you selfish, heartless girl, she was pacing now, gesturing wildly. You want to kill your sister. You want her to die so you can have all the attention for yourself? She grabbed a dish from the counter and threw it into the sink. The sound of shattering porcelain made me jump. You're going to murder your own sister because you're too selfish to help her. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function, but somehow I managed to run upstairs to my room. I grabbed my still-packed suitcase and stuffed in a few more things from my dresser while Mom continued screaming from downstairs. "You get back here. We're not done talking about this." But I was done. I ran down the stairs, past my raging mother, and out the front door. I could hear her following me, still shouting about how selfish I was, how I was killing my sister, how I was a horrible daughter. I just kept running until I couldn't hear her anymore. My grandparents' house was only a few blocks away. Grandma opened the door before I even finished knocking. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" She pulled me into a hug as I burst into tears again. Grandpa appeared behind her, his face concerned. They sat me down in their cozy living room, the same room where we'd spent so many happy moments as a family. Grandma made hot chocolate, not the instant kind, but real hot chocolate with melted chocolate and warm milk, just like she used to make when I was little. Through tears and shaking hands wrapped around the warm mug, I told them everything. About Mom's demand for my kidney, her cruel words, her rage when I said I needed time to think. "Of course we knew about Sarah's condition," Grandpa said softly. "We've been helping with her medical bills." But this, he shook his head. "Sweetheart," Grandma took my hand, "this has to be your decision. Nobody, not even your mother, has the right to demand something like this from you. It's your body, your choice." My phone kept buzzing in my pocket. Mom's name flashed on the screen over and over. "Get tested immediately. Your sister needs you. Stop being so selfish. I can't believe you're doing this to your own sister." I turned off my phone. The next morning, we were sitting at breakfast when we heard the front door slam open. Mom burst into the dining room like a hurricane, her hair wild, her eyes blazing. "You're coming home right now," she demanded, pointing at me. "We're going to the hospital to get you tested." "She's your daughter too," Grandma said, putting her arm around my shoulders. "You can't force her to give up a kidney. Even for Sarah's sake." "The hell I can't." Mom's voice reached a new pitch of hysteria. "She has to do it. And if she doesn't," she turned to me, her eyes cold and hard. "If you don't do this, you're dead to me. Do you understand? You won't be my daughter anymore." Before anyone could respond, she spun around and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that Grandma's china cabinet rattled. The sound of her car engine revving and tires screeching on pavement echoed through the sudden silence. That afternoon, I decided to visit Sarah in the hospital. The nurse at the station handed me a surgical mask, making me sanitize my hands thoroughly before leading me to Sarah's room. Walking into that sterile hospital room was like stepping into another world. The steady beep of monitors filled the air, and tubes seemed to connect my sister to every machine imaginable. Sarah looked so small in that big hospital bed, but her face lit up when she saw me. "Amy," her voice was weak, but her smile was as bright as ever. "You came." I carefully sat in the chair beside her bed, trying not to disturb any of the tubes or wires. "Of course I came, Squirt. Someone has to make sure you're not driving the nurses crazy." We sat there for a while, talking about nothing and everything, her favorite nurse, my college classes, the terrible hospital food. Then her expression turned serious. "Mom told me," she said quietly, "about asking you to be my donor." I felt my throat tighten. "Sarah." "No, listen," she reached for my hand, her fingers cold against mine. "I would never ask you to do that. It has to be your choice, Amy. Only yours." Tears welled up in my eyes as I squeezed her hand. Here she was, hooked up to machines, fighting for her life, and still thinking about my feelings. While Mom was at home screaming about my selfishness, Sarah was protecting my right to choose. Looking at her lying there, so brave and so sick, I made my decision. "I want to get tested," I said, "not because Mom's forcing me, but because I want to know if I can help." When Mom found out about my decision to get tested, it was like the past few days never happened. She rushed to hug me, crying and saying, "You're doing the right thing, Amy, the right thing." I moved back home from my grandparents' house, and over the next few weeks, I underwent test after test. Blood draws, tissue typing, psychological evaluations, the works. Mom was suddenly sweet as pie, making my favorite meals and asking about my day. It was like having the mother I'd always wanted, but somehow that made it even worse. Finally, after what felt like endless waiting, the doctor called us in to discuss the results. Mom and I sat in his office, the desk between us covered with papers and test results. He adjusted his glasses, looking uncomfortable. "I'm afraid I have some unexpected news," he began, shuffling through the papers. "According to these tests, Amy cannot be a donor for Sarah." Mom leaned forward. "What? Why not? We can do more tests." "It's not about more tests," the doctor interrupted gently. "The issue is, well, the degree of kinship between Amy and Sarah. It's not sufficient for a transplant." I sat there in the doctor's office, trying to make sense of his words. The room seemed to be spinning slightly. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "What exactly do you mean by degree of kinship? Can you explain?" The doctor cleared his throat, glancing between Mom and me. "Well, the genetic markers in your blood work show that you and Sarah are not full siblings. You share only one parent in common." I turned to look at Mom. She had gone completely white, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles matched her face. "Mom," my voice came out as barely a whisper. "What's he talking about? How is this possible?" She jumped to her feet so quickly that her chair almost fell over. "This doesn't matter, none of this matters, we'll find another donor." Before either of us could say anything else, she bolted from the office, letting the door slam behind her. The doctor waited a moment before speaking again, his voice gentle. "Ms. Mitchell, the tests show that while you and Sarah share the same mother, you have different fathers. Your sister's biological father is not the same man who raised you." The words hit me like a physical blow. Different fathers. My sister's biological father isn't my father. Mom had cheated on Dad, had an affair, got pregnant with Sarah while married to my father. The drive home was a blur. I don't even remember getting in my car or navigating the familiar streets. When I walked into the house, I found Mom sitting at the kitchen table, a bottle of cognac and a half-empty glass in front of her. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking, "about how you cheated on Dad, about how you betrayed him." She took another swig from her glass, not even bothering to look at me. "It's none of your business. And anyway, what difference does it make now? You're useless, you can't even help your sister." I stared at her in disbelief. "My business? Dad was my father. And you cheated on him. You had an affair and got pregnant with Sarah. This is all your fault. If you hadn't cheated, if Sarah had the same father as me, I could have helped her." The sound of the slap echoed through the kitchen before I even registered that Mom had moved. My cheek burned where her hand had struck me, and I stood frozen, watching as she stormed up the stairs to my room. She came back moments later with my suitcase, the one I'd barely unpacked after moving back from my grandparents, and threw it at my feet. "Get out," she screamed, her words slightly slurred from the cognac. "I never loved you anyway. It should have been you. You should have been the one who got sick, not my precious Sarah." I stood there, my hand still pressed against my stinging cheek, as her words sank in. Never loved me, should have been me. The truth I'd always suspected, finally spoken out loud. Without a word, I picked up my suitcase. Mom was still screaming, but her words had become meaningless noise. I walked out the front door, pulling it closed behind me, cutting off her voice mid-rant. I found myself back at my grandparents' doorstep, tears streaming down my face. This time when Grandma opened the door, I couldn't even speak, I just fell into her arms, sobbing. They sat me down in the kitchen, and through hiccuping breaths, I told them everything. About the test results. About Mom's affair. About how Sarah wasn't really Dad's daughter. About Mom's cruel words and how she'd thrown me out. Grandma's face grew harder with each word, while Grandpa sat completely still, his coffee growing cold in front of him. When I finished, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. We'll handle this, Grandma said firmly, reaching for the phone. First thing tomorrow morning. And she did. I was eating breakfast the next day when Grandma made the call, putting it on speaker so Grandpa could hear too. Marie, this is Ellen. Grandma's voice was cold as ice. Pack your things. You need to leave the house. Mom's voice crackled through the speaker. What? What are you talking about? That house belongs to us, Grandma continued. And you who betrayed our son, who's been cruel to our granddaughter, you have no right to live there anymore. It was just one time. Mom's voice rose to a shriek. It was an accident. I loved John, I really did. And I love Amy too, you have to believe me. One time was enough, Grandpa spoke up, his voice trembling with anger. One time destroyed this family. Please, Mom was crying now. Where will we go? What about Sarah's treatment? We could stop paying for Sarah's treatment, Grandma said coldly. She's not our granddaughter, after all. I felt my heart stop for a moment, but Grandma continued. But we won't do that. We're not cruel like you, Marie. We'll continue to pay for Sarah's treatment because she's an innocent child who needs help. But you need to leave that house, find your own place to live, and get a job. It's long past time you stood on your own 2 feet. The next day, I went to visit Sarah in the hospital. She looked even smaller than before, if that was possible. When I walked in, she gave me a weak smile. Hey, she said softly. So I guess we know why you can't be my donor now. Different dads, who would have thought, right? Listen to me, I squeezed her hand, nothing has changed between us. You're still my sister, and I still love you. Grandma and Grandpa are going to keep helping with your treatment. We're going to find you a donor, Sarah. I promise. Really? Her eyes filled with tears. Even though I'm not really there. Really, I cut her off firmly. Family isn't just about blood. It's about love. And you're my sister, no matter what any test says. It's been 3 months since everything fell apart, though sometimes it feels like years. I'm back at college now, trying to focus on my studies and build some kind of normal life. Mom is still living in the house. Grandma and Grandpa decided to let her stay, not for her sake, but for Sarah's. She needs someone to drive her to dialysis, Grandpa explained when I questioned their decision. And someone needs to be there when she's not feeling well. Sarah goes to the hemodialysis center 3 times a week. It's hard on her body, but she's tough. We talk on the phone almost every day, and she never complains, though I can sometimes hear the exhaustion in her voice. But last week, everything changed. Sarah called me, and for the first time in months, she sounded excited. Amy, she practically shouted into the phone. They found a donor. The doctor just told us. There was this man, he died in an accident, but he was an organ donor. And I'm a match. She was crying now, happy tears. I'm getting a kidney, Amy. I might actually get better. I found myself crying too, relief washing over me like a wave. After everything we'd been through, finally some good news. When I want to see Sarah now, I arrange it through our grandparents. She comes to their house, and we spend time together there, away from Mom. Grandma makes us hot chocolate, the real kind, still, and Grandpa tells terrible jokes that make Sarah laugh until she has to hold her sides. They treat Sarah with such kindness, even though they know she's not their biological granddaughter. She's just a child, Grandma said once, when I mentioned it. None of this is her fault. They did pull me aside last week, though, after Sarah had gone home. We need to talk about something serious, Grandpa said, sitting me down in his study. About our will. I started to protest, but he held up his hand. You need to know this. Everything we have, the house, our savings, everything, it's going to you, Amy. Only you. But Sarah, I began. Sarah isn't our granddaughter, Grandma said gently. However, once it's yours, you can do whatever you want with it. If you want to share with your sister, that will be your choice. I understood what they were really saying. They were punishing Mom, not Sarah. Speaking of Mom, she called me yesterday. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Amy, her voice was small, hesitant, I need your help. Could you talk to your grandparents? Ask them to let me stay in the house permanently? I know if you ask them. No, my voice was firm, final. Please, Amy, I'm your mother, I know I made mistakes, but... Mistakes? I cut her off. You cheated on Dad, you lied to everyone for years, you treated me like I was nothing, you never loved me. That's not true. I hung up the phone. Maybe someday I'll forgive her. Maybe someday the pain of her betrayal won't feel so sharp. But not today. Today, I'm focusing on Sarah's upcoming transplant, on my studies, on building a life that isn't defined by my mother's choices.